Paws Academy. It's not just training, it's training that clicks.
Hello, welcome back to Barks to Basics. I'm Renee, the founder of Paws Academy. And if you've been following our series so far, you'll know we like to keep things practical, honest, and rooted in real life dog behaviour. So no gimmicks, no sugarcoating, just good straightforward understanding of how our dogs actually think, feel and behave. And today we're digging into a question that does come up from time to time from clients, from listeners, you know, from people at the park. Why do our dogs react when we cry? Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, well, isn't that obvious? They're showing some empathy. And for others, maybe you're wondering if your dog's lack of response, you know, when you're in tears, means that something's wrong. And the truth, as with most things to do with dogs really, is that it's more complex and also more interesting, I guess, than it first appears. So let me start off with a story, because a few years ago I had a client called Sarah. Sarah adopted this absolutely gorgeous little lurcher called Max. And Max had a bit of a rough start in life, nothing extreme, but he's clearly been bounced around from houses to houses, homes to homes. And this had really knocked his confidence. And Sarah had told me that whenever she cried, which was quite often because she was going through a little bit of a breakup at the time and it was difficult for her, Max would quietly bring her his toy squirrel. Every time. No fuss, no drama. He just sort of suddenly appeared beside her, dropped the toy into her lap and sat down with her. Now, was Max consciously thinking, here, have my toy, it will make you feel better? Well, probably not in the way that a human might, but there was something in Sarah's emotion that triggered a response from Max, something that prompted him to do something in those moments. And that, I think, is where the magic lies with our dogs. So if I take it from the top, do our dogs understand crying? Well, not exactly, and not in the same way that humans do. They don't hear us sobbing and think, oh, sadness, grief, loss, emotional overwhelm, but they do notice change. So when we cry, we behave differently. Our voices might go high, strained, our body language shifts, our breathing can go in sharp bursts, we might curl up into a ball. And dogs are exceptional at reading all of this. Their whole social intelligence has evolved around turning or tuning into the cues of those around them. So not just through language, but through movement, sound and scent. And that last one, by the way, scent, that's a big one, because when we're upset, we release different hormones. So cortisol levels rise. And some dogs, and especially those that you would consider more scent driven or scent sensitive, so spaniels, beagles, and sometimes even staffies, will notice that change almost immediately because our emotional state has a literal smell to them. So whilst your dog might not grasp the concept of crying, they are incredibly attuned to what it represents. So disruption, stress, unease. And then we need to look at how they respond and why. And this is where I think things get really fascinating, because some dogs, say like Max, will take his toy squirrel and respond with a sort of quiet action. Others may immediately jump up beside you, they'll lick your face, they'll paw your legs for attention. And then you've got other dogs that become very still, watchful, and some that sort of take themselves out of the room, if you will. They remove themselves entirely from that situation. And each response is valid. And importantly, each one of those different responses tells us something about that dog's temperament and their past experiences and their understanding of you as their person. So if I broke this down, I guess, a little bit further, dogs who come close and make contact are often very socially bonded. They've likely had lots of positive reinforcement for that kind of interaction. As an example, maybe you've stroked them or held them in the past when you've been upset, and now they associate that behaviour with comfort or closeness, or maybe they're naturally drawn to human emotion. And it's something we see a lot of in breeds, say, that were bred for companionship, service roles. So you think cabs, Labradors, retrievers, etc. Then you've got the dogs that are, let's call them observers, the dogs that stay nearby, but they don't engage directly. These are dogs who are naturally more cautious, or those that are still figuring things out. They're paying attention, but perhaps unsure what to do. So that's not a lack of empathy from them, that's uncertainty, and it's very normal. And finally, the dogs that walk away. And let's be honest, this can be the hardest for some owners to accept, because I've had clients say, I was just in tears on the sofa and she walked off like she didn't care. But here's the thing we need to remember is dogs are not programmed to interpret our human emotional displays the same way that we are. And for some dogs, that intense emotion that we could be displaying is really unsettling for them. And if a dog's early life has taught them that loud sounds, sudden movements is threatening, our crying might not be read as sadness to them. It could be read as danger or confusion. So, are dogs actually showing empathy? The short answer here is maybe. There is a longer answer, and what dogs show is often called emotional contagion. And this is the tendency to match the emotional state of someone around you. So we can see this in humans too. You know that feeling when someone's crying and you start tearing up yourself, even if you're not entirely sure why. Well, that would be classed as emotional contagion. And there has been research on this. There was one study by researchers in Vienna who found that dogs who heard recordings of a baby crying showed more signs of stress than when they heard neutral noises. And then there was another study from the University of London, and they looked at how dogs responded to their owners feigning distress versus just humming. And these dogs were significantly more likely to approach and interact with their owners when they were pretending to cry. So this tells us that dogs are picking up on emotional cues and responding, but whether that response is true empathy in the ability to feel and understand another's emotional experience or a learned behaviour response is really still up for debate. In practice though, whether your dog comforts you out of instinct or understanding, it still means something and it still builds connection. So let me take you on to some real stories with some real dogs, because if you've listened to me for a while, you know I like to sort of put these in. One of my long-term clients, Mike, he had a gangly, massive dobe called Jet. And Jet's a real goofball. And how do I say this? Not the sharpest tool in the shed, shall we say, but totally loving. And Mike was telling me that after a particularly tough time where he lost a parent, he was really upset in the garden because he didn't want to upset anyone in the house. And Jet, who's usually, you know, would run mad circles in the garden, just stopped, walked over and stood with him. No jumping, no licking, just stillness with his head pressed against Mike's leg. And that kind of response that would be, I don't know, still, calm, steady, is one that I've seen in dogs who are confident, grounded and deeply in tune and bonded. And I don't really like the word bonded, but I think you know what I mean, with their humans, where they're not trying to fix anything, they are just being there. And then there's Tasha. Tasha's a Whippet mix. She's from one of our reactivity programs, and her owner, Priya, said she always worried that Tasha didn't really get her because she wasn't actually cuddly. She was easily startled. She was quite nervous in general. But the first time Priya cried in front of her, Tasha crept forward very slowly and nudged her hand with her nose. Then she walked away again. And that for Tasha, let's be honest, that was massive. That's huge. So these moments, however small they are, they're always worth paying attention to. So then you've got the other say, what if your dog doesn't respond at all? And let me say this loud and clear to you. If your dog doesn't comfort you when you cry, it doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they're not bonded to you. And again, I don't like that word, but that they're not attached to you. It doesn't mean that you failed them. Dogs are individual, just like we are. Some people are huggers. That would be me. Some are fixers. Sometimes that's me. Some are avoiders, and some get overwhelmed by emotion, especially if there's noise involved and need space to process. Others might have been punished in the past for reacting to human outbursts, and so they've learned to stay away when feelings get too much for them, when they get too loud. So instead of focusing on what your dog doesn't do, what we need to do is start looking for the subtle things that they do. So do they glance at you more? Do they pace a bit? Do they lie down nearer to you rather than their usual spots? And all of these signs are that they are aware and responding, but in their own way. So can you help your dog feel more comfortable around your emotions? Well, absolutely. And in fact, for some dogs, especially rescues or those with more anxious tendencies, border collies, it can be important to do so. So here are a couple of things that you can try. So you can use a consistent cue like a soft "it's okay" or your dog's name in a gentle tone. This can reassure them that your emotion isn't directed at them. You can keep your body open and low rather than, collapsing into a heap, into a ball. And sit on the floor perhaps with an open posture and allow them to approach you. And avoid sudden outbursts. Now I know that depending on why you're upset, and then, if you've got some bad news, this isn't always possible. And life, does go on, and sometimes you react the way you react. But if you feel those emotions building inside you, moving to a quiet space can really help your dog stay calm. And you compare emotional moments with calm cues. So have a blanket or a toy nearby that's associated with quiet time so that your dog learns that these moments are safe. It's really not about training your dog to be your emotional support animal. It's about helping them feel safe when the energy due to being upset, etc., in the room shifts. And this matters because the way our dogs respond to us emotionally is probably one of the most beautiful parts of living alongside them. It's not perfect, it's not always predictable, but it is meaningful. Dogs don't speak our language, but do you know what? They're always listening. They don't always understand our tears, but they do see the change. They feel the tension. They notice when we're not ourselves, and in their own way, whether by offering a toy, pressing a head to our legs, or simply sitting nearby to us, they respond. So we don't need to make it more complicated than that. We just need to be present. We need to notice what our dogs do, honour it, and meet them where they are. So that's it for this episode of Barks to Basics, and I hope it's given you a new lens through which to see your dog's behaviour, especially in those tender and emotional moments. And if you've got a story about how your dog responds when you cry, honestly, I'd love to hear it. These stories never get too old for me, and you can drop me a message through the Paws Academy website. And if today's episode gave you a bit of comfort or perhaps a new insight, feel free to share it with someone else who lives with a dog. That's how we get better at understanding our dogs, by sharing this information one conversation at a time. So thanks again for being here, and give your dogs a bit of extra attention today, whether that's a walk, a game, or just a quiet sit together. And I'll see you next time on Barks to Basics.
At Paul's Academy.